Hey, what's up everybody, this is Mewth24, and as I mentioned in the previous episode of my UC Gundam Experience, this second episode is going to cover the two Universal Century films, Char's Counterattack and F91, and we're going to start off here with Char's Counterattack. Now, this is a film that's got a lot riding on it. It's got to sort of fill in the last chapter of the legacy of the Char-Amuro conflict, and at the same time sort of cover its own story from beginning to end, which is a lot to throw on one plate. And while this is probably the longest of the Gundam films, this is the one that has the most setup that's required, which is interesting because F91 is its own thing. It's a completely new chapter of the UC storyline, where Char's Counterattack, it's still following on the heels of, Zeta Gundam, the original Gundam series, and even Double Zeta to a slightly lesser extent. With so much going on in the first act of Char's Counterattack, I won't lie that it does feel a little bit jarred and sort of inconsistent to me. They sort of jump around a bunch and expect you to be able to keep up with the unspecific time frame. There's never really a given number as to what's happening when, how fast it's happening, how much, when and where. Whether it's a matter of hours or months between the events, like the colony dropping and, Char and Amuro sort of amassing their forces on opposite sides of this conflict. And so it's a lot to jump into right away. Now, I will say that the second half of the film, I think, is great. I really enjoyed it. And it does provide a satisfying conclusion to the Char-Amuro storyline. But there's just a lot going on there at the beginning that makes it rather confusing to jump into, even if you know the backstory of the Char-Amuro legacy. Char's Counterattack boasts what are easily some of my favorite mobile suit designs from the entire Gundam metaverse, and I think that's due in large part to the wide variety of different schools of design that are present in the series. There are artists that worked on a number of other series, like Evangelion, and I believe one of the Macross artists, I could be wrong on that, but it was like a number of artists and writers who went on to do other mecha series of their own, and so it's really cool to see this early rendering of what some of their stuff would look like later on kind of thrown together, and it presents a nice variety in designs, but also there's sort of this feel that everything here is consistent. Not only that it's a good building point off of the already established designs from the earlier UC stuff, but that it's a consistent style for the Char's Counterattack designs as a whole. The soundtrack is solid enough, and the art style throughout I think is really good, especially for its time. I mean, obviously with a standalone film you're going to have a bigger budget than you would for a full-blown series, but still, it looks really nice for its day and stands up pretty well, I think, even with some of the more modern Gundam series. That said, I don't feel like I enjoyed Char's Counterattack as much as I had hoped I would. It's not that it's a bad film, but it just, there's so much going on at the beginning and so much that you're supposed to understand in such a short time period that I feel like this was probably one of my less enjoyable Gundam series in the UC side of things. Now, that said, I wouldn't rank it as low as War in the Pocket, which was, I think, far and away my least favorite UC experience to date. But it just doesn't rank up to a lot of the other stories in the UC timeline, especially when you're considering the legacy that Char and Amuro have with everything, and just how big of a role they played and everything. It's nice to see that this is focused entirely on them, and I really do appreciate that, because they are such pivotal and important and interesting characters in the UC side of things. But as for the first act of this finale, it's a little weak. The end game, though, the final chapter of this film is fantastic, and I really did enjoy the sort of wrapping up of things there. And so while Char's Counterattack was doing this whole formula of old meets new with, classic characters you've known for years, and some new ones, arguably more annoying ones like Quest Pariah, F91 had a bigger plate to fill in that it was a completely new story with completely new characters and a self-contained plot. That's the one thing that's very interesting about F91 is that the runtime is roughly the same as Char's Counterattack, but it's a story that, while it's still a pretty decently sized conflict in scope, it's one that you don't have any context for, that you need to understand, the series have been running for years here. You also have this story focused primarily on Seabook Arno and Cecily Fairchild, as well as some of their friends and allies that they meet across the course of the story, but it's still always kind of comes back to them in the end. Now, I will admit, I don't really care much for Iron Mask. I think he's one of the most forgettable villains in the Gundam metaverse, but there is something to be said about the fact that this is setting up for something much larger, and yet it still feels very self-contained, very focused, and covers a lot very well in such a restrained time period. I mean, Char's Counterattack is a decently long movie, and so is F91, but F91 is dealing with something completely new. The whole Crossbone Vanguard conflict is a lot to cover in such a short time period, and I think the film actually handles that pretty well. Now, with all that in mind, I think you're going to get the most mileage out of F91 if you follow up by reading its sequels in the Crossbone Gundam storylines, and to a lesser extent, the follow-up that it has in Victory Gundam. I think there's a lot of implications as to, where the events of F91 lead in Crossbone Gundam, and sort of the impact that the designs of these mobile suits have, going smaller and becoming more heavily armed in the future along the storyline of Victory Gundam. And so when it all boils down to it, I think that yes, F91 has maybe a more simple premise than some other Gundam storylines, but it also has a really high production quality overall. The soundtrack is fantastic. Maybe it borrows a little bit from some Star Wars tunes, but it sounds really good. The film looks fantastic. I even really do like the mobile suit designs being a little bit more, gritty and industrial and sort of World War II military style in their designs, at least for the Crossbone Vanguard mobile suits. I also really like the fact that it's still consistent with some of the older UC designs, like the Jagans make a comeback, but it's also setting up for something new and different with the Crossbone Gundam and Victory Gundam storylines. So, because of that, I think F91 is easily my favorite of the standalone films, both UC and alternate universe storylines. Anyways, everybody, that wraps up episode 2 of my UC Gundam Experience series. I'm not sure which one I'm going to cover next, but I will say that episodes 3 and 4 will be split up as the following. One of them will cover Victory Gundam and Zeta Gundam, and the other one will cover the remaining UC OVAs, being the first MS Igloo, both Apocalypse 0079 and the Hidden One Year War, and then MS Igloo 2, Gravity of the Battlefront, as well as Unicorn Gundam. It's really a matter of whether I finish watching the final episode of Unicorn Gundam, or I finish up the remaining episodes I have of Victory Gundam that will determine which one comes next. I really wanted to do the rest of this whole series in chronological order, but considering I still haven't watched the original Mobile Suit Gundam or Double Zeta, those are the last two that I have to watch. It just didn't seem, right to wait that long to start doing this stuff improper. So the UC stuff is out of order, but I'll still rank it as what ones are my favorite and so on. So that's pretty much it for this episode, and with that I will see you guys next time.